In order to do the little flowerets, I'm going to be working with a number 3 Rosemary and Company round watercolor brush. And I'm also going to be working with another brush. It's a Low Cornell. It's a really old brush. It's called a spotter brush. It's not made anymore, but it's just, I'm going to be using this to keep it clean. I have a little pot of clear water, and I'm going to use this to wet the surface because I don't want the little pale yellow areas to get dirty. So if I have blue or pink or whatever on my brush, it's going to, and I wet the whole surface, it's going to bleed into that, and I don't want that. So this brush is going to be used to add the clear water, and then I'm going to be dropping in colors. I have over here on the palette, this little plastic palette, I have my phthalo blue, and I have the quinacridone magenta, and over here is a mixture of the purple, which is the combination of the two. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I've already done some that you can see here. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be working on ones that will not be touching each other, because right now I don't want the just to disturb, and I can see my lines. So I'm going to stay inside the lines of each floweret. So starting on this one, I'm actually putting clear water down. This one is behind the other one, and everything else here is dry because I did this earlier today. So I'm wetting this with my clear brush. Clear water, clear brush. And then I'm going to come in with the smaller brush here. So I kind of have a paper towel, and I have 2 brushes, the clear brush and then the brush that I'm going to paint with. So, all right. So I've got a little bit of blue on my brush, and because this little area is wet, I'm going to drop the phthalo blue in, and I'm not going right to the edge because in my photograph of the flower that I liked so much, the edges were more pink and purple, and the interior was more blue as it goes into the center of the floweret. Here, I have this petal that's in front, and so it probably would cast a bit of a shadow. So I'm placing a little bit of color, making sure that I don't go into that cream because I really don't want to lose the area there. So I'm now I've gone and changed the water in my brush, gotten rid of the blue, and I've taken some of the magenta onto the brush, and I'm going to go right to the edge of that line and let it bleed. Now, as we recall from the previous lesson as we were working, that watercolor will dry lighter. So when you put this in, it might seem strong, but know that it's going to bleed, and it's also going to dry a little bit lighter. This is wet, so the 2 colors are beginning to mix, but I've taken the paint off of my brush, and I'm going to just very gently move it in towards the center of the petal, and I'm going to stay away from that cream center. I really don't want it to get muddy. Okay, so now that I've gotten that one done, I now can come to another one which is not touching this one. So I actually know that this one here is going to be my next one, and I will come in with my clear water, with my clean brush, and I'm going to wet the whole area. The reason why I wet into even the yellow area, even though I'm not going to be dropping paint into this yellow area, is that I want it to bleed and just sort of stop. If I only put water into this area here, what would end up happening is I would have a line. So I want the watercolor to kind of move across the paper. So I'm going to grab a little bit of the phthalo blue on my brush, and then I'm going to sort of drop it in and let it bleed. And I don't really go into this area with my brush right now because if I do, it'll turn green. So I'm taking a little bit of the pink and I'm adding that pink out onto the outer edge. And you can also, if you want, you can take a little bit of purple. So I've made it a little stronger. Rinse my brush off, and then I can come in and just sort of make those edges nice and crisp. And I'll continue to move around. Right now this one is wet, so I'm not going to do this petal, and I'm going to move on to another area. So I have to figure out where I want to go, and I think that I will come in and I can actually see that I missed a little area where there should be some negative space. So I'm going to come in and connect that petal in there. So now by drawing that little line, that means that this little space down here is going to be negative space. This petal is wet right now, so I'm going to just go over to this one over here. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. You want to make sure that you don't have them bleed, because then you'll lose the edge of each petal that you're painting. So I've wet this with the clear water with the clean brush, and I'm going to come in with my phthalo blue. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that you can see the palette. So here I've got a little bit of the phthalo blue. I've got a pretty wet brush, and I'm going to come in and drop paint. And then because this one is behind another one, I'm going to use a little bit of the purple. So if it's not wet enough, you can just add a little bit of water to your palette. These are pretty clear, transparent colors at this point, so I can just kind of play around. And so far this is coming out pretty good. Pretty happy with this. So now I'm going to wet another one. And I think I'll come over and I will do back here. So I'm really jumping around on this painting. I am right-handed, and so I'm sort of starting up at the top so that when my hand moves down, I'm not putting my hand in the middle of a wet place. And this one is pretty much in shadow here, so I'm going to actually drop some purple in here. Purple is the darker of the colors. If I want to make it even darker, I could add a little bit more of the phthalo blue, which is what I just did. So remember that light advances and dark recedes. So anything that you're looking for that is going to be behind something else, you can just make that a little bit darker. And I'll add a little bit more purple. And I'm just going to pull some of this color down. Alrighty. So here's another one. So I'm going to come in and paint this with clear water. I've already painted a little bit of negative space here. And this time, I think I'll use a little bit more pink. So when you're looking at the hydrangea, you just want to know that there's a lot of color variation within it, and you don't want to just do everything exactly the same, because it does tend to get kind of boring, and you sort of lose the charm and the beauty of having it be different. So don't be afraid to have a little bit more color variation because I think that you'll end up being a lot happier. I'm going to go right over the top of this negative space because I think it could actually be darker and it's already dry. So if you notice when I did that, it actually darkened that little triangle there. And that's one of the things that's nice about working with this is that you end up with a lot of color that, because the watercolor is transparent, you're able to play around and glaze over top. So that's what I just did there. I'm going to come in and do some of this top petal here. And as it's at the top where the light source is, it's going to be lighter at the top and it's going to be darker as it goes into the interior. So I'm going to drop the color here and then let it bleed up towards the top. So if I have to, I can turn this upside down and then just very lightly begin to pull some of that color up to the top. And I can go right over my background, which is that deep, deep phthalo blue, to sort of get rid of that line and make a curve. But I still have, because I've very deliberately placed the darks down here, you can see that as it raises up to the top, the water is just moving the watercolor up towards the top. And you can see right here that this one is darker and this is really light. So it's actually kind of pretty. I think that it will need a little bit of color, but I don't want to do too much because I also have to do some detail on the center part of these tiny little button parts. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to work on this. I'm going to go off camera, paint a little bit, and then come back and you'll see the process, because I'm basically going to be doing the same thing over and over again, and it's going to take time for me to do that. Just a little update to let you see that I have kind of worked this area here down with this leaf. I like to work from background to foreground, so this leaf will be done last. That's why I did this leaf first. And when I get to the leaf, I'll do a little bit of a demonstration so that you can see. One of the things that I did not show you, which I did as an afterthought, was after I let these two things dry, I noticed that the white of the paper was fairly harsh against the green. So I took some of the pale yellow wash and I placed it a clear, almost like really, really weak tea over the top. So you can kind of see that there's more of a yellow cast. And I think that that gave it a little bit more relationship to the pale yellow background, also with these pale yellow centers. So that's one of the things that I did as an afterthought, but I think it's actually working really well. So I have come in and I'm working across here, and I actually have not done that petal yet because I actually kind of like it. And I'm just going to now start. I worked a little bit down in here, and I'm going to start to work across, over this way. I've now finished all of the color on the hydrangea flowers, and I'm just going to come in and start to shore up and create a little bit more depth. I'm using a very tiny brush, and I have a very watery mixture of sort of a neutral gray. And so I'm going to come in and work around the little center parts and try to create a little bit more shadows, try to get rid of some of these blue lines that are here, and just, kind of add some finishing touches. The gray is a neutral, and it's from the same mixture. I basically used the purple and then added a little bit of the green swatch that I have over here. And it's just dilute. It's very, very diluted. So it has a lavender tint to it. And it's just a nice little touch. Again, keeping in that same primary 3 colors that I've been using. And you can use it to kind of outline things if you need to. Just this comes into the finishing touches. You can create soft shadows without having to go really dark. The negative spaces are, you know, where we're really seeing super, super darks. But I just want to give some final touches on the center parts. The paint is really, really thin, and so it has a tendency to bleed. So you just need to be a little bit mindful and a little careful when you're doing this. I'm adding a little bit of a cast shadow to the right side of the little cluster of the center, just to, because they are raised up, and I think that they could project possibly a small shadow. And that's still in keeping with the light source being at the upper left. If you're having trouble with working with a really tiny brush like this, you can always switch over to a colored pencil if you want, and that can also help you to speed things up and to make it just a little bit easier. It's really up to you. There are people that would never do any kind of, they would only stay within the watercolor and they would not add other mediums in, but I like to actually play around with adding different elements into my work. It's really preference, and for this particular lesson, I'm really staying just with watercolor. I haven't added any colored pencil except in this border. The outline here, I did use a ruler and I did use a corresponding colored pencil. By adding the neutral pale gray line over the top of the blue pencil line, it's kind of eliminating that sharp blue color. I could have transferred the drawing not using a colored pencil, but doing it in graphite, or as I spoke earlier in the lesson, a black very-thin pencil, which comes out looking very much like a pencil, a regular graphite pencil. So there are a lot of options, and as you begin to work your paintings, you'll begin to find preferences that work for you. What works for me may not work for you, and so don't get discouraged. Just try something else. You know, make a note of what is working for you and what isn't, and you'll find that it'll make life a lot easier for you. Okay. I'm now going to go back over. I'm going to start working on this leaf, and I will sort of walk you through that, and then, well, I'm almost done. I've turned the painting upside down, and I'm wetting each different segment. So I just wet this area, and I can see from where I've done previously that I've dropped a darker pigment, and I'm going to just strengthen up and create more darks. I'm still working with the same green, and every once in a while I add a little bit more of that quinacridone magenta color to sort of get rid of that crazy Kelly green color, because these leaves are really not green. As a matter of fact, they're very dark. So as you can see, there's a lot of water on here, and I'm able to come in and just use the tip of my brush. So this is a number 3 watercolor round, and just very gently tap the darker pigment in, and it spreads. So it's actually spreading up and coming to this line. I have the painting upside down because I just find it a little bit easier to do these curves in the leaf in the direction towards me. Okay, so right now that's looking pretty good. I'm going to add some little bit more dark in here too. Now this has dried, so it's leaving a harsh line. And so I got rid of the pigment. I added some water on the brush. I dried the brush off, and then I'm just going to fan some of this color out. So if I find that it's still, I don't want to lose that highlight, so I'm actually removing the paint and placing that in, so the brush is just fairly damp. Okay, so now I'm going to come to the next one. So there's another section here. I'm going to wet it, and I'm not going to come right up to the line where I just just painted, because what'll happen is I will end up bleeding into the next one. So I'm just wetting the area, leaving a little bit of a variation, and this will end up being a nice vein. Coming in, getting some paint on my brush, and then coming in and dropping the darkest pigment in and along the midrib, and then moving it out. And as you can see, it's very nicely creating more washes, and I still have not lost my highlights. So that's going to be really important for me. And now you can see that it's making, it almost looks like, there's the vein, which is great because I don't have to do any work to do that. I'm going to come in and strengthen up this edge here. I've got some white area here where the paper has not been wet before, so I need to make sure that I get that in there. And you can always just lightly blend things out by removing the paint off your brush and removing the water. You want to remember that you don't want to put too much water onto the paper, especially when it's already wet, because then what will happen is you will create blooms, and you really don't want to create a bloom. So you want your paper to be almost identical to the strength, to the moisture content that you have. So I've got that one down, and I'm going to come in and do the same thing. So I'm wetting the area, not a ton of water, not as much as when I first started. And I'm kind of staying away, a small margin, staying away from the layer that I just did, the section that I just did. Coming into my paint, grabbing a little bit of the darker color and dropping it. I'm going to continue doing this, and when I get to the other side, I will come back and show you a little bit more. Okay, I want to show you, I just dropped paint in here, and it bled out into the area where I don't want it. So now the best thing to do is to get rid of my paint and quickly come in while it's still wet and remove that. So often people say that watercolor is unforgivable and that you cannot correct mistakes. So as you can see right just at that point, I was able to get that pigment out from the area that I didn't want it to be in. And I think it's really important that you realize that if your brush is damp with no paint on it, you can come in and do that. You can actually like remove areas, backwash it, like push it out of the way, remove it. And it's going to make a big difference in the fact that things are correctable. So things happen and you can backpedal out. You just sort of really want to make sure, especially if you have a staining pigment like phthalo blue, that you don't end up losing your highlights. That's kind of important. You could get them back, but you won't get them back as nicely as you did other pigments. So just be aware of that.